31 seconds. That's all it took for American Airlines Flight 191 to begin its takeoff roll at O'Hare International Airport. Climbed to 325 feet, lose its left engine, and roll violently, ploughing itself into the ground, killing all those on board. 31 seconds would be all it took. 31 seconds for a disaster that was over 2 months in the making.
Good evening. The worst air crash in American history took place today. An American Airlines DC-10 with 279 people aboard lost power during a takeoff from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport.
If you've ever been in an aeroplane, then you would probably expect, at a bare minimum, that all the engines would remain attached for the duration of the flight. First Officer James Dillard, someone who had over 1,000 hours of flight time in the DC-10, also thought that, as he began to pull the nose up, slowly working American Airlines Flight 191 into the air. But as soon as the plane left the ground, the left side engine gave way. The rear attachment of the engine and pylon structure broke off. This structure, still producing thrust, would then proceed to swing itself up and around the wing, before ripping itself from the plane completely. The damage to the rear fitting that had caused it to fail occurred 2 months earlier, during a routine maintenance at an American Airlines facility. Engineers were trying to remove the engine and the pylon to allow for an inspection of the left side wing. Standard procedure would mean having to remove the engine and only then removing the pylon above it. This was the way in which the manufacturer, McDonnell Douglas, recommended it be carried out. But in an attempt to save over 200 man-hours and lower the amount of disconnects and then reconnects of things like hydraulic lines and electrical connections, amongst others, the standard maintenance procedure was changed. Now, both the pylon and the engine would be removed as a singular piece. Several airlines, not just American, had decided to conduct the procedure this way. United Airlines would support the entire structure with an overhead crane, while American and Continental Airlines would use a large forklift to balance the load. This engine and pylon structure together would weigh about 20,000 pounds, and had to be supported by just a single forklift, as they detached it from the wing. Any swing or instability would cause that massive amount of mass to hit against the wing, and if it did, damage to either the wing or the pylon was almost guaranteed. The crew working on the DC-10 that day in March 1979 had first removed the rear or aft attachment of the pylon to the wing, one of two. The forklift holding the structure in place, though, wasn't able to keep everything perfectly stable. With the forward attachment still in place, the instability of the forklift caused the whole engine and pylon structure to seesaw and slam itself into the wing, damaging it. It would be this attachment, 2 months later, at O'Hare International Airport, that would fail completely, causing the engine to break free from the plane and tumble down the runway, to the horror of the air traffic controllers looking on. But even so, there are countless stories of planes losing a single engine, sometimes even more, whether from bird strikes or some other cause, and still being capable of flying, or at least surviving. The DC-10 literally losing its left engine wouldn't normally be enough to cause the plane to crash, even with the loss of thrust. It still had two others that could pick up the slack. But as a series of events that day were about to play out, luck wasn't going to be on the side of all 271 people on board.
The worst air accident ever took 582 lives when two 747s collided on the runway in the Canary Islands. NBC News will have a special report on today's crash at 11:30 this evening Eastern Time.
The damage caused by the General Electric engine swinging around and slamming into the top side of the wing wasn't going to be the only problem that the flight crew would have to deal with during those 31 seconds. This wasn't a clean disconnect, The countless hydraulic, fuel and electrical lines that ran from the engine into the fuselage would also be ripped from the plane. This had several catastrophic effects. First of all electrical power to the captain's side instrument panel, the stall warning and the slat disagreement warning light were completely disabled. The slats were a part of the wing that extended during takeoff and landing. This extension would allow the DC-10 to gain more lift from a lower airspeed. The slats staying extended for the first part of takeoff and climb out was critical for the flight's safety. Also critical was if there was a disagreement between both sets of slats on either wing. This asymmetry could cause serious control issues if not caught quickly and rectified. But with the damaged electronics, none of the flight crew were going to be able to tell if this was even happening. From their position on the wing, they weren't even able to see the engine or the damaged wing. Second, hydraulic system number 1 was completely severed. This controlled key and critical flight controls on the left-hand side of the aircraft. Most importantly, those very same left side outboard slats. The same slats that gave the DC-10 a significant part of its lift during takeoff. A scenario like losing a hydraulic system upon takeoff just hadn't really been accounted for. So when the left side engine sheared away from the wing, the flight crew were taken completely by surprise. From the fact that they had lost an engine, and had almost no time to realise that the hydraulic line and all the pressure in it had been ripped away alongside it. This loss of pressure in the system overall, and the aerodynamic pressure experienced by the wing, caused the left side slats to retract, causing a significant loss of lift on only the left wing. The design of the DC-10 had assumed that the pressure from the hydraulic system would be enough to hold the slats in place, and on countless flights before it would be. But with that system now gone, and no mechanical locking system there to take its place, the inevitable happened. But even so, if the plane had managed to gain enough airspeed, there would still be a significant amount of airflow over both wings, especially the left side wing, enough to provide lift and prevent a stall. But that didn't happen. Well, it did, and then it didn't. At the moment that the left wing slats started to retract, causing a loss in lift, the plane was travelling above the stall speed of the left wing, enough to climb out, turn around, and come back to the airport. But on the flight deck, something very different was happening. The flight crew had limited information on what was even occurring. Standard emergency procedure would dictate that they should climb out at the plane's V2 speed. But at this point, they were already travelling well above that speed, so they needed to slow down. And they did. The problem was that the stall speed of the left wing with the slats retracted was 6 knots above the plane's V2 speed, the speed that the plane was now going below. Remember, the flight crew could not even see the wing or the engines from the flight deck. When you add on to this the fact that the stall warnings were disabled from the electrical damage sustained, and the slat disagreement warning was in a similar state, the flight crew had almost no way of knowing what was actually happening.
Good evening. The experts have decided it wasn't just the suspect bolt that caused this country's worst air crash last Friday. They have found what they called grave and potentially dangerous deficiencies in the DC-10 engine mounts. So today, the Federal Aviation Administration grounded all 134 DC-10s operated by U.S.
Being barely 300 feet above the ground, they also had no time to even react before the plane began to roll. Once it had begun, it became basically impossible to stop, condemning all those on board, and even 2 garage workers on the ground near the airport, where the plane was eventually going to impact, to death. The damage to the reputation of the DC-10 was almost as large as the crash. This accident had occurred not long after two others involving the design of the plane's cargo doors. And even though the cause of this accident wasn't related to the plane itself, the fear that it instilled in future passengers meant that the damage had already been done. Following the crash, the DC-10 would be grounded by the FAA. Investigations into other DC-10s found similar structural damage to the exact same section of the wing as Flight 191. As a result, the maintenance procedure that involved removing the engine and pylon as a single unit was banned. The FAA even went as far as to state that any carrier who removed the engine and pylon as a single unit would immediately render the plane unairworthy. American Airlines would end up being fined $500,000, or $1.6 million in today's money. The DC-10 would eventually recover at least part of its reputation from this incident, and several others, going on to have a long service career before eventually flying for the final time in 2014 as a part of Biman Bangladesh Airlines. It was only 31 seconds from takeoff roll to tragedy. Only 31 seconds for hundreds to die and thousands of lives to change in an instant. May all those who tragically lost their lives that day in 1979 rest in peace.